Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Es para mí un placer presentar y moderar este webinar junto con Amundi, que se titula Cómo abordar la construcción de carteras Net Zero. Yo quería comentar antes de presentar a nuestro ponente y a Amundi que, como sabéis, CFA Institute ha mostrado un compromiso creciente con la sostenibilidad, reflejado en la cada vez mayor inclusión de temas relacionados con los factores ESG en su currículum y en la oferta de cursos formativos específicos. Fruto de ello fue la creación del Comité de Sostenibilidad CFA, Spain, que nació en el 2019 y que se ha renovado recientemente con la incorporación de nuevos profesionales. Los objetivos principales del comité son, en primer lugar, el de promover y afianzar en España la certificación CFA ESG Investing, que fue lanzada en el 2019 y que creemos que desde luego se ha posicionado como una de las certificaciones en sostenibilidad de mayor relevancia a nivel mundial. Quiero destacar además, por ejemplo, que en España ya hay 379 personas con la certificación y entre otros objetivos del comité pues está el de dar a conocer otras certificaciones y cursos que CFA está promoviendo ligados a sostenibilidad, como puede ser, por ejemplo, un curso recientemente lanzado que es el Climate Risk Valuation and Investing Certificate, y también, entre otros objetivos, el ampliar la difusión de publicaciones y recursos de investigación, participación regular en la difusión de artículos de opinión y en promover pues, seminarios, webs y eventos como este que actualmente tenemos. Es para mí un verdadero placer, como he comentado antes, hoy contar con Amundi, principal gestora francesa y muy especializada en temas de sostenibilidad, y en concreto con Thierry Roncalli, doctor en Economía y director de Estrategia Quant de Carteras de Amundi de Investment Institute. Thierry comenzó su carrera profesional en Crédit Lyonnais en 1999 como ingeniero financiero y más recientemente ha sido director de análisis y desarrollo en Lyxor Asset Management durante 7 años, director de producto y estrategia de inversión en Société Générale Asset Management, la gestora de inversión alternativa de Société Générale, y director de análisis de riesgo del grupo de análisis operativo de Crédit Agricole. El Amundi Investment Institute se creó para profundizar en el diálogo estratégico con los clientes y compartir el liderazgo de Amundi en análisis e investigación económica y financiera. Trabaja con todas las plataformas de inversión del grupo para combinar el estudio de la economía y los mercados y sus implicaciones para los inversores, ayudando a los clientes a navegar en un mundo cada vez más complejo y cambiante. Como sabéis, las inversiones son un vehículo catalizador para financiar la transición energética y alcanzar los objetivos del Acuerdo de París y los compromisos de Net Zero 2050, evitando así las peores consecuencias del cambio climático. Esta es la razón por la que las gestoras de fondos y firmas de inversión como Amundi cuentan cada vez con mayores recursos para apoyar este compromiso global a través de fondos y soluciones de inversión, asesoramiento, servicios a través de otras actividades como puede ser el diálogo y el voto en juntas generales. Conscientes del papel de la industria de gestión de activos en la financiación de la transición, Amundi se unió junto con otras gestoras en el 2021 a la iniciativa Net Zero Asset Managers, comprometiéndose a apoyar el objetivo global de neutralidad de carbono para 2050. Con la sesión de hoy, desde CFA Society Spain, buscamos compartir conocimiento con la construcción de carteras Net Zero y sus diferentes enfoques de la mano de este experto. Las políticas Net Zero deben de abordar dos dimensiones y nos lo va a contar con mayor detalle Thierry para la descarbonización de las carteras y la financiación de la transición. Thierry, it's really a big pleasure for us to have you here with the CFA Institute and with the Sustainable CFA Committee. Welcome, and please give us your knowledge and everything that Amundi is doing regarding a net zero approach and this really challenging environment we have to deal with. Thank you very much again for your participation.
Many thanks, Augusto. So, do you see my screen?
Yes.
It's okay. Okay. So, many thanks, Augusto, and everybody at CFA Spain for organizing this seminar. So it is a pleasure to be with you, and I hope you will enjoy this presentation. So today I will talk about an important topic, net zero investing, or more specifically, how to build a net zero investment policy? So this is not an easy question to answer, but I hope to list some of the important issues that investors need to be aware. So my presentation is based on 2 research papers that you can find in the Amundi Research Center. So you can also find them in the SSRN website. So the first paper is Net Zero Investment Portfolio, the Comprehensive Integrated Approach. And the second paper is Net Zero Investment Portfolio, the Core Satellite Approach. So how to define a net zero investment portfolio? So not an easy question. First, a net zero portfolio is not a low carbon portfolio. And why? Because when we build a low carbon portfolio, the objective is very simple. We want to reduce the carbon footprint of a given portfolio. So a low carbon portfolio is a static approach to decarbonization. Net zero portfolio implies a dynamic approach to decarbonization in order to reach net zero by 2050. So the concept of self-decarbonization is important. And we cannot look at a net zero portfolio as an investment process where we just apply a sequence of decarbonization rates and a sequence of portfolio rebalancing. Indeed, a part of decarbonization must be endogenous in a net zero portfolio. So another important difference is that a net zero portfolio has to take into account for the financing of the transition. So the greenness or the green intensity of the portfolio is important. Therefore, a net zero investment policy has 2 main dimensions: portfolio decarbonization, the first dimension, and the second dimension, financing the transition. So net zero investing is not just a carbon footprint issue. It is also a green footprint issue, and these 2 concepts are different. So let us illustrate first the concept of self-decarbonization. So we assume that the decarbonization rate at the beginning of the year is 30%. At the end of the year, we want to have a decarbonization rate of 35% relative to the benchmark. And we consider 2 extreme cases. First panel on the left, at the end of the year, the decarbonization rate of the portfolio is 25%, which means that the carbon footprint of our portfolio has increased. So in this case, we have to rebalance the portfolio in order to reach the level of 35%. So this is the bad case because the self-decarbonization of the portfolio is 0. Third panel on the right, the green panel, at the end of the year, the decarbonization rate of the portfolio is greater than 35%, which means that we do not need to rebalance the portfolio. So this is a good case because we have nothing to do. We do not have to rebalance the portfolio. So we can always follow a decarbonization pathway by rebalancing the portfolio when the assets are liquid, but it doesn't mean that the investment process is a net zero investment policy. In particular, there are some financial businesses where it is difficult to rebalance the portfolio. Think, for instance, for example, about the business of banking loans or credit, or the business of insurance companies. In asset management, we have the chance to have this rebalancing possibility. An issue concerns the decarbonization pathway. So in this slide, on the left, I have reported the CTB and PAB pathways in order to compare them with the decarbonization scenario of the International Energy Agency, which correspond to the blue line. I have also reported the average trajectory of asset owners of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. So this is the red dashed line. And first problem, how to compare trajectories based on carbon intensity with trajectories based on carbon emission. Indeed, CTB and PAB are defined with respect to carbon intensity, while the International Energy Agency scenario is defined with respect to carbon emissions. The second problem concerns the magnitude of the reduction scenario. Do we have to decarbonize strongly at the beginning, at the middle, or at the end of the period? So until 2050. So the dilemma is then the following. First, decarbonization, and then transition, or first, financing the transition in order to decarbonize later but faster in the future. And the last issue is the sequencing of decarbonization and the sequencing of the transition. According to the International Energy Agency, power electricity must be the first sector to decarbonize, while industrials is the last sector to decarbonize, because it first needs green electricity, green materials, green buildings, and green transport. So this means that there is a sequencing of decarbonization. So concerning the second dimension of net zero policies, I indicate here a report published by McKinsey in February 2022. To achieve net zero by 2050, we need to collectively invest an extra $3.5 trillion per year. So this represents 4.1% of the world GDP. So the gap between current investment and expected investment is huge. And we cannot close the gap ASAP. It will take time. So I think that these figures are very interesting because when asset managers or asset owners talk about or speak about net zero investing, they may focus mainly on portfolio decarbonization, how to reduce the carbon footprint of the portfolio. But we cannot reduce net zero investing to an exercise in portfolio decarbonization. Portfolio decarbonization is part of the solution, but what really matters is the second part of net zero investing, how to finance the transition to a low carbon economy. This is really the difficulty of net zero investing because we have two goals, portfolio decarbonization and financing the transition. How to be sure that there is no conflict between these two objectives. So there are two approaches in the industry to implement a net zero investment policy. The integrated approach is commonly used, is generally used by equity and bond mutual funds and also ETF. So the idea is to complement portfolio decarbonization by managing the self-decarbonization and the green intensity of the portfolio. The core satellite portfolio is the second solution and is generally implemented by in multi-asset management and strategic asset allocation. So the idea is to split the problem. The core portfolio is used for the decarbonization dimension, while the financing the transition is done by the satellite portfolio. So the integrated approach can be seen as an extension of portfolio decarbonization by addressing the self-decarbonization and the transition issues. In this slide, I use the Trucost database and I show the histogram of carbon intensities with a low scale, considering all the issuers in the database. So we can see you have the scope 1, the scope 2, the scope 3 upstream, and the scope 3 downstream. We can see that the range of carbon intensities for scope 1 and 2 is very large. Let's say from 0.1 ton of CO2 per dollar million of revenues to 10,000 tons of CO2 per dollar millions of revenue. So this means that we can easily find outliers, extreme values, issuer with very high carbon intensities and issuer with very low carbon intensity. So in this case, it is relatively easy to reduce the carbon footprint of a portfolio. We need to remove the issuer with the highest carbon intensity, for example, greater than 1,000, and replace them with the issuer with the lowest carbon intensity, for instance, less than 5 or 10. Now, if we focus on scope 3, we obtain another story because the range is not as wide. We do not have issuers with very low carbon intensity when we consider upstream scope 3 emissions. For example, the lower bound of scope 3 emissions is equal to 25 tons of CO2 per $1 million of revenue. So including scope 3 change the nature of portfolio decarbonization. So it is more difficult to decarbonize the portfolio if we include scope 3 emissions. The consequence is that active risk, the active risk increase dramatically when we incorporate scope 3 emissions. The scope definition of carbon emission is an important choice for a net zero investment policy. Do we have to use scope 3 emissions? And do we face double counting figures? Yes, we face double counting figures, we face double counting numbers, but it is really important to include scope 3 emissions for companies. And why? Because scope 1 and 2 can give a false perception of the carbon footprint, and net zero implies that the system is closed. So in order to show the impact of the supply chain, I have reported here some figures about carbon emissions and intensity. For instance, let us compare the scope 1 carbon intensity of Apple and the scope 1 carbon intensity of Samsung Electronics. The scope 1 carbon intensity of Apple is equal to 0.2, while the scope 1 carbon intensity of Samsung Electronics is equal to 25.6. So we obtained a ratio of 125. And so this is very curious because they do the same job, Apple and Samsung. So why do we have this big difference? Because the production of iPhones is not fully located in Apple. It is mainly located in the supply chain of Apple. So therefore, we can have issuers with low carbon intensity for scope 1 and 2, but when we introduce scope 3, they have a high carbon footprint. This is also the case of food and beverage companies because of the carbon emission of the upstream, in particular when they produce milk or dairy products. And this is why you see that Danone and Nestle have a high carbon footprint when we include the scope 3 emissions. However, the calculation of scope 3 emission is not yet mature. For example, only 53 companies in the S&P 500 index have reported some elements of scope 3 in 2022 with an average of 5 elements across the 15 categories. You know that in the scope 3 you have 8 upstream and 7 downstream, and on average, when companies report scope 3, they report on average 5 elements among the 15. So the data are not comprehensive. So this is why many whole upstream scope 3 emissions in commercial databases are estimated and not reported. So we can use many metrics to measure the self-decarbonization rate of a portfolio. One famous example is temperature rating or temperature scores. In our research, we use a very simple approach which consists in estimating the linear trend. Using past emission, we estimate the linear trend and compute the carbon momentum as a ratio between the slope of the trend and the current carbon emissions. So carbon momentum is then expressed in percent and is a proxy of the self-decarbonization rate based on past history. In this slide, I have reported some statistics about carbon momentum for all the issuers of the Trucost database. So we consider 5-year historical data. So how to read these results? First, we distinguish carbon emissions and carbon intensity, and we also consider several scopes, scope 1, scope 1 and 2, scope 1 and 2 and 3 upstream. So the first figure is equal to 1.7%, and so this is the median carbon momentum if we consider carbon emission and scope 1. So this means that on average, companies in the Trucost database have increased their scope 1 carbon emission by 1.7% per year. For the scope 1, we have 43.3% of issuers that have a negative carbon momentum, so they have reduced their carbon emission, but we have also 17.1% of issuers that have a positive carbon momentum greater than 10% every year. So this means that you have in the database 17% of issuers that have increased their carbon emission by more than 10% every year if we consider the last 5 years. So we don't like this type of issuers. Net zero investors prefer, of course, issuers with negative carbon momentum. Now, if we consider carbon intensity, so this is the second part of the table, the story is different. Since the median carbon momentum is negative, minus 2.3% for the scope 1, so this means that on average, the companies have decreased their carbon intensity by 2.3% every year. And there are more issuers with a negative carbon momentum than with a positive carbon momentum. So carbon momentum is very important to measure the self-decarbonization of a portfolio. Indeed, if we have a portfolio with a positive carbon momentum, the only way, so we expect that the carbon emissions will increase in the future. So the only way to reduce the carbon footprint of this portfolio over time is applying portfolio rebalancing, is to rebalance the portfolio. In fact, we can always follow a decarbonization pathway because we can rebalance the portfolio in asset management. How to define the greenness of the portfolio? So we need a carbon intensity equivalent. So this is called green intensity, and certainly one of the most popular measures is green revenue share, which is the ratio of green revenue to total revenue. But we can also use green capex. Today, we do not have use green capex because few companies report it. But in the future, green capex figures will play an important role in defining a net zero investment policy. And why? Because in fact, green capex can be seen as a forward-looking measure of future green revenues or green intensity. So I consider a portfolio decarbonization problem. So I skip this slide, but this is typically a mathematical problem that is used, for instance, to build an ETF. And so what do we see if we implement a portfolio decarbonization policy? We find that the portfolio is long financials and short energy, materials, and utilities, even after accounting for scope 3 emissions. This is the case for equities. What do you see? You see that, for instance, if we like to reduce the MSCI World, the carbon footprint by 90%, what do we see? We see that the weight of energy is equal to 0. The weight of financial is 28%. So we multiply by 2 the weight of the benchmark. We see that materials has a very small weight, let's say less than 25 basis points, and utilities is close to 0, 12 basis points in the decarbonized portfolio versus 3.21% in the benchmark. what is the impact of portfolio decarbonization on the green intensity? And we find that the green intensity decreases with the reduction rate of the carbon intensity. For instance, the green revenue share of the MSCI World Index is equal to 5.24%. If we reduce the carbon footprint by 90%, we obtain a green intensity lower than 5%. For instance, if we include the Scope 3 upstream emission, we have a carbon intensity which is close to 0.68. And why? Because today we observe a positive correlation between carbon intensity and green intensity. So this is one issue for implementing net zero. By reducing the carbon intensity, we also reduce the green intensity. So a net zero optimization problem can be seen as a variation of a low carbon optimization problem when the decarbonization pathway is dynamic. We had some new constraints to account for the transition dimension of net zero. First, we want to control the self-decarbonization rate of the portfolio. Second, we want to increase the green intensity of the portfolio. And third, we can eventually remove assets from the portfolios that are fundamentally issuers that are fundamentally enemies of a net zero investment policy. For example, issuers that have a positive carbon momentum or issuers that have a carbon momentum greater than 10%. Here are the results when we would like to multiply the green intensity by a factor of 2. So this is for the MSCI World. And when we would like to target a self-decarbonization by 5%. So this is the result for the PAB decarbonization pathway. So the blue line indicates the tracking error volatility. It is expressed in basis point when we implement only the decarbonization dimension. Now, the green surface indicates the additional tracking error cost when we had the transition dimension. So when we combine the two dimensions, the additional cost can be high. You see a big difference between the blue line and the green line. Of course, these results depend on the investment universe. The impact, so for instance, for the MSCI World, what do you see? If we only consider the Scope 1, today, if we implement only the decarbonization, we have a tracking error of 30 basis points. And now, if we add the transition dimension, we have a tracking error of 90 basis points. What do we see? We see that the impact can be larger for smaller investment universe. For instance, what do you see? You see that this is the case for the MSCI EMU index. The green line is above the blue line, and also for the MSCI USA. So here I have reported the shrinkage, the reduction of the investment universe when we implement a net zero policy. So the blue spider chart is the original investment universe of the MSCI World. The other spider chart corresponds to the investment universe of a net zero optimized portfolio. So we notice that the investment reduction may be highly reduced. The investment universe may be highly reduced, meaning that we can face a diversification issue. And the problem increases if we consider the addition of an issuer exclusion constraint based on its momentum. So in addition to the integrated approach, multi-asset fund managers use a core satellite approach. And since carbon intensity and green intensity are positively correlated, this means that the objectives of the two dimensions are slightly different. So the idea is to simplify the problem and to split the problem into two sub-problems. The goal of the core portfolio is to define a low carbon strategy, while the goal of the satellite portfolio is to finance the transition. And so the management of the core portfolio is then very similar to the management of a low carbon portfolio. This is not the case of the satellite. So the core portfolio, we use a traditional decarbonization. So I skip this part. To build the satellite portfolio, we need to understand how to achieve net zero emission by 2050. In theory, it is very simple. From a theoretical point of view, it is very simple. We need to massively electrify the world economy and have green electricity. The central idea is to link all industrial processes to the electricity sector, and the electricity sector must be green. So the current situation is as follows. Electricity production is about, today, 30,000 terawatt hours. The unit energy intensity is 500 grams per kilowatt hour. So if we multiply these two figures, we get 15 gigatons of CO2. By 2050, we will need 100,000 terawatt hours. And if the unit energy intensity is less than 20 grams per kilowatt hour, we will generate 2 gigatons of CO2. This is enough to be absorbed by natural carbon sink. So to give you an idea, the emission factor is today 11 grams per kilowatt hour in Sweden. In France, it is close to 60. In Spain, it is close to 169. In Germany, it is equal to 350. So this gives you an idea about what we have to do in terms of green electricity. So this means a complete transformation of the supply chain of the global economy. On this slide, I show two charts that were published in the new McKinsey report on net zero. On the left, we have the current supply chain. Industrial processes depend, in this case, in descending order, first oil, second gas, third coal, and fourth nuclear. On the right, we have the supply chain of a net zero economy. In this case, electricity is the central node of the supply chain, and industrial processes depend on renewable bioenergy and nuclear. So to change the supply chain, to obtain this new supply chain, we need $3.5 trillion per year. And I have reported here on the allocation of the funding. 72% of 3.5 trillion is for electricity, power generation, power network, power storage. 14% for buildings and 8% from transport. Again, we see the importance of the electricity sector as just 38% of funding requirement are for the power generation, and 26 of funding requirement are for power grids. So if we map this funding needs to the GICS classification, we get this figure. First, we have the sector level 1 classification, and then we have the industry group level 2, then the industry level 3, and finally you have the sub-industry level 4. So the satellite corresponds to the sub-industry level 4 that we need to achieve net zero. So the blue bar corresponds to the mapping with the satellite portfolio. And so this means that the investment universe of the satellite portfolio is concentrated in a small number of the GICS sub-industries, 25 among 165. So the most important sector is 55, that is the sector of utilities. It is followed by industrials and materials. So therefore, the investment universe of the satellite portfolio is very far from a traditional benchmark, such as the MSCI World Index. Other net zero issues, I don't have time, but of course, there are some issues in terms of materials and who will finance the transition. The investment universe of the satellite portfolio may consist of green sustainability and sustainability bonds, also green equities, green infrastructure, and sustainable real estate. Obviously, the bond satellite is composed mainly of green bonds, but we can also include some sustainability and sustainability-linked bonds. Social bonds are not used because they are not net zero assets. However, these bonds are not sufficient to finance the transition. They finance between 12% and 25% of the net zero requirement. So in the table to the right, I have reported what the GSS bond market does and does not finance. And using the upper bound assumption, we see that only 15% of the electricity generation investment are financed by green bonds. 50% of electricity grids are financed by green bonds. 30% of electricity storage are financed by green bonds, and less than 11% of hydrogen investment are financed by green bonds. On the contrary, what do you see? You see that more than 60% of, for instance, the needs for building green capex are financed by there is a problem with my screen, no?
Yes, Thierry, we see that message. Just put 1 hour and...
Yes, I tried, but the schedule. I think that I will stop my... Stop share. Sorry. I am sorry. I will change. Share screen. So do you see my screen now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
Thierry,
I am sorry.
No problem.
So okay, it's okay. Do you see my screen? Right? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So what does it mean in terms of tracking error? So for the bond satellite, calculations show that we must expect a 3% tracking error volatility for the bonds. The equity satellite is highly related to the concept of thematic equities. So in the coming months, a lot of new ETF will be created in order to feed the demand of net zero thematics. For the equity satellite, calculation shows that we must expect a 20% tracking error volatility. So you see that the satellite, there is a lot of tracking error volatility with respect to a traditional benchmark. And it is very interesting to note that two sectors dominate the universe of green stocks. These are utilities and industrials. So you remember that portfolio decarbonization implies to reduce the allocation on utilities and industrials. But if we consider the second dimension, financing the transition and improving the greenness of the portfolio, what do we observe? We observe that utilities and industrials are the two most important sectors in order to achieve net zero by 2050. So what level of tracking error we can expect from a core satellite portfolio, net zero portfolio? I have reported here the expected tracking error volatility for the 4 components of the portfolio. For the core portfolio, the core equity portfolio, we have a tracking error of 2%. For the core bond portfolio, we have a tracking error of 25 basis points. For the satellite equity portfolio, 20% of tracking error, and for the satellite bond portfolio, 3%. So this means that the tracking error volatility of 60-40 constant mix portfolio will be between 2 and 3% when the satellite allocation is 20%. So in conclusion, what are the main points to remember? Net zero implies to shift from a static approach of decarbonization to a dynamic approach of decarbonization. In some sense, the decarbonization must be endogenous. And this is why the concept of self-decarbonization is very important. I do not have presented these results, but we found that the cost for equity portfolios will be greater than the cost for bond portfolio. When I say cost, I mean tracking error volatility, active risk, diversification, and liquidity risk. And why it is easier to implement net zero in bonds than in equities? This is because bonds mature, they have a maturity, and so they are replaced. The old bonds are replaced by new bonds that are more green. In general, what do we observe? We observe that in the primary market, bonds are greener than in the secondary market. So the primary market helps when implementing net zero in bonds. So this is finished.
Great. Thanks a lot, Thierry. Thank you for the presentation. We have some questions, and actually really interesting questions we would like to ask you that are in the chat. I will read it for you, if you may. One is coming from Denise Zelaya, and she says, on the increase on carbon emissions, if they have a positive carbon momentum, but because they have increased the coverage of scope 1, 2, 3 categories, is it still penalized by investors?
So, in fact, generally, investors are not penalized because we use carbon intensity and not carbon emissions. So, carbon intensity corresponds to the ratio between carbon emissions and revenues. So we can have revenues that increase more than carbon emissions. And so this is why, for instance, what we observe in the market, of course, portfolio decarbonization, the management of the portfolio and all the metrics are done using carbon intensities, but sometimes what do we observe? We observe that asset managers and asset owners implement an exclusion process based on carbon emission. Okay, it's okay. This means that they would like to invest in issuers with negative carbon momentum on carbon intensities. But if the issuer has a too important carbon momentum in terms of carbon emissions, this issuer can be excluded.
Okay, great, Thierry. I have another question from Veronica Salcedo. How can we consider the self-decarbonization of one company in the cost of capital for investors?
No, very, very interesting question. So, in fact, it is related to the valuation of a company. So, and effectively, it is very difficult to answer this question, but what do we see? We see that more and more equity analysts, in fact, integrate the climate change dimension when they value companies. And so, in particular, when they measure the cost of capital, and so they integrate the concept of, let's say, carbon tax, carbon pricing, and self-decarbonization. So this is for corporates. For investors, it is more difficult. Typically, so on an aggregate basis, it is more difficult to understand what is the impact of self-decarbonization on the cost of capital.
Okay, thank you, Thierry. There's another question, and actually it is a really important topic. The question is where the just transition is assessed in the constructions of net zero portfolios.
In this case, this is related to ESG criteria. Just transition, in this case, this means that we need to consider the social pillar of climate change. So here I have reported some simulations, but of course, when asset managers and asset owners build net zero portfolios, they integrate ESG criteria. Here I have just used climate risk measure and not ESG risk measure. But the idea is to combine climate risk measure with ESG criteria, in particular the social metrics and so on.
Okay, great. I have a question on my own. You have talked a lot about the Scope 1 emissions that covers emissions from sources that an organization owns or controls directly. Scope 2 emissions that are emissions that a company causes indirectly and comes from where the energy is purchased and used, is produced. And the Scope 3 emission that encompasses emissions that are not produced by the company itself and are more related to the value chain up and down. And you have actually posed that Scope 3 is really important in order to assess what are the emissions of the companies. I have two questions related to this. First one about quality of Scope 3 emissions that you already mentioned it. Second one about the importance of having reliable information related to green capex, and what's your opinion about how companies are dealing with being able to produce and give that information, and how do you see this in different geographic areas? For instance, European companies being more focused because of regulators rather than other companies seated otherwise in other geographical areas with that reliable information put it in place.
Yes, very interesting. Of course, in fact, the quality of Scope 3 emissions are today very poor. Very poor, and why? Because you know that for Scope 1 and 2, we have a GHG protocol, we have some standards. But we don't have today standards for Scope 3 emissions. So companies are not mandatory to report Scope 3 emissions. But what is the issue is that because there is no standard, this means that if a company reports Scope 3 emissions, it uses its own standard, its own model to estimate the Scope 3 emissions. So what do we see? We see that effectively the quality of data is very poor, data are very scarce, and moreover, what is the difficulty is to compare the data from one company to another company. So we expect that this quality of data will increase in the future because there are some reporting needs. In particular, if you think about TCFD, ISSB, and so on. But the problem is that we don't have the standard now. So we have to create the standards like for Scope 1 and 2. So let's see. For green capex, I am more positive. Why? Because I think that it's not so complicated to calculate green capex, because Scope 3 emissions are very complicated to calculate. But for green capex, this is not the case. What do we see? We see that there are more and more companies that report green capex, and in particular because of the CSRD regulation. So today we have you have data providers that provide estimate of green capex. I think that in 2 years, green capex will be extensively used by investors. Why? Because next year we will have the first reporting of CSRD, so we will have the data, and certainly this data will be used by investors, because these data are very important. Because net zero is not just a question of carbon, but it is a question of green intensity. And so green capex are very important. Why? Because it is a forward-looking measure for the green intensity of the economy. In terms of geographical issue, effectively, what we observe that European companies they take the lead. They are followed by American companies. In particular, when these American companies are operated in Europe. Why? Because they need to comply with the CSRD directive and so on. There is one region where the data remains very poor. This is Japan. Japan, the data continue to be very poor.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Thierry. Last question. It's related to what you have mentioned. I know Amundi is it's a signature of net zero Asset Management Alliance.
Yes.
The question is related to, do you find necessary that a company must be signatory of an alliance or organization like the Net Zero Banking Alliance or Net Zero Asset Management Alliance or any other ones to have a quality net zero portfolio or not?
No, this is not mandatory. This is not mandatory, but for an asset manager, most of clients require that you are signatory of an alliance. So this is not mandatory, but from a business perspective, it is important to be in an alliance to show that you are on the front.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Thierry, for being in this masterclass, in this webinar from CFA Institute and the
Many thanks.
CFA Sustainable Committee of the CFA Spain. Thanks, Amundi, okay, for being with us also in this webinar. And I want to say also thanks to everyone that have attended this masterclass. I hope it has been interesting for everyone. Thank you. Thanks a lot again. See you soon.
Thank you.
Okay.